Let's start off our crusade into 3-betting by looking at linear models. First off, a definition. 3-betting from the top down. The 3-bet range can be any width depending on the needs of the situation, but there is no gap in the hands that hero is 3-betting. Only a continuous procession of hands from ace-ace all the way down to where we decide our hand is too weak to 3-bet. So the idea of linear, the old school kind of definition of it was it's value. It's always for value. And as we evolved as a poker community, we kind of realized that the notion of value was a little bit ambiguous before the flop. I mean, do you really need to have an equity advantage to 3-bet a hand in a really plus EV manner when you're so far from showdown? And there's things like position, implied odds, different board textures, skill advantage to play out. Probably not. Furthermore, if we did have to have this arbitrary cutoff of being ahead of villain's calling range, how far ahead would we need to be? Could we be very microscopically ahead? Would we need to be 5%, like 55% equity? Like, what would be the deal there? So we don't really use linear anymore to mean for value, because for value is kind of ambiguous when used in terms of equity. It's not clear that it's a good way of thinking about 3-betting. A linear definition, as I'm using it here, as you can see, just means starting off at the top, working down to whatever hand you're going to stop 3-betting at, and 3-betting all of the hands in between. It means from the top down. In my definition of linear, and what I believe to be the true definition of linear, any range at all that fits that criteria is linear. 100% of hands is linear because it starts at aces and it moves down. Everything but the weakest hand in the game, 6 deuce off, 7 deuce off, that's linear too. And a range of just pocket aces, that's linear as well because it starts at aces and works its way down. The only ranges that aren't linear would be ranges that start somewhere that's not the top, or ranges that use some kind of gap in them, like aces, kings, queens, and then 6-5 suited, for a random arbitrary example. So that's what I mean. Oftentimes, when we're using a linear range, it will be for value, definitely. It will be clearly to play against a weaker player, to, build the pot with a very good hand because we think we're getting called often, and just things like that. So very often, linear and value will go hand in hand, they will coincide, but I want to be very clear that a linear range is not necessarily for value. Let's investigate this further. So linear strategies are used whenever one of the following two conditions is met. Firstly, hero thinks that fold equity against the opener or the players behind him is low. If you're not going to get many folds, it does not make sense to build a big pot with 6-4 suited or any other hand that would constitute a gap. We just want to start at the top, we want to work down until we've reached the hand that we think is too weak to 3-bet with, so we might 3-bet 8s plus, we might 3-bet suited broadways, offsuit broadways, king, queen and ace jack plus, and that's it. If we think the other hands below them are too weak when we've built a big pot, if we have a lot of fold equity, we can make up for that, definitely. But one absolutely necessary, one condition that will make you want to, a sufficient condition is what I'm trying to say, a condition that is enough on its own to make you want to adopt a linear strategy would be that fold equity is low. If fold equity is really low, there's no other type of strategy that we want to use. As we saw earlier in that spectrum model, I'll just go back quickly, you can see there, low fold equity equals a linear range. Skipping forward again, so linear strategies are used when fold equity is low. Another sufficient condition, got my words right this time, is that hero does not wish to develop a flatting range against the open. Let's consider this for a second. First of all, think about what kind of spots this might be true in. And what sort of spots would hero maybe want to pass up the opportunity to have a flatting range in the first place? Pause the video, have a think about it. The one that springs to mind, assuming you've done that to me, is going to be, well, there's two spots really, but the first and foremost one is going to be small blind versus late position steal. And in my books I've always outlined that it's not really worth developing a flatting range in the small blind against late position in no limit hold'em unless you actually have weaker players in the big blind that you're more desperate to play pots with, or maybe just evidence that the guy in the big blind does not really squeeze. And the reason for that is that flatting a capped range out of the small blind is going to make it very, very difficult to defend. Most of the burden of defense will lie with button, but basically a lot of people will squeeze that spot. Button has a very wide range, button is very vulnerable to being squeezed at a high frequency, and when you put extra money in the small blind, you almost just sweeten the punch for the big blind and allow him to squeeze even wider than he would 3-bet button ordinarily, which is quite wide, 16, 17%, possibly depending on the strategy, something like that. So to flat a capped range here, without a good read that it's a great idea, is not going to be a good strategy. So there we would decide to only 3-bet or fold when we play a hand, and the repercussions of that are quite simple. If we're only 3-betting or folding, we're going to develop a linear 3-bet range because our 3-bet range is going to start at the top and it's going to work its way down. we're certainly not going to be having gaps in our 3-bet range if we've decided that we're only going to 3-bet when we play a pot. That wouldn't make any sense at all. Imagine the absurdity of a strategy where we are 3-betting ace queen off, folding king queen off, but 3-betting king jack off. It doesn't make sense. You put money into the pot with stronger hands before you start folding. That's just common sense.